Good morning, good day, good evening, good afternoon, Mystic Magic podcasters. We are so blessed to have our guest today, Dr. Maisha Hazzard. She's an innovative educator. She's a behavior change communication specialist, a speechwriter, a media consultant. She holds advanced degrees in communications, transpersonal psychology, behavioral science, and counseling. She studied international studies, cross-cultural education, information science, neuroscience, and metaphysics, and a whole bunch of stuff at various institutes around the globe. She was 25 years as a university professor and international consultant, and more than 25 simultaneous years writing, directing, performing, and producing and performing arts and media arts programs on 5 continents. So Maisha Hazzard is an award-winning radio producer, and she has been training writers, producers, and media consultants over 30 countries or more. And she's taught or performed in many of these countries. And Dr. Maisha has lectured and taught in Ohio, Guyana, the West Indies, India, California, Arkansas, at several universities. She's conducted training programs for Voice of America, USAID, South African Parliament, Bush Radio South Africa, and World Health Organization, our favorite organization today. Maisha is a metaphysical minister. She's ordained in religious science. She got her ordination at City of Angels, Church of Religious Science, and Emerson Theological Institute in New Thought Ancient Wisdom at the Agape International Spiritual Center, and in metaphysical ministry by the International Metaphysical Ministry, IMM. She studied world religions and metaphysics at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, University of Ibadan in Nigeria, a lot of other
That's
places.
Enough.
She's a Rosicrucian, and so we're in deep waters today. But I know we all know how to swim. Dr. Maisha, Mystic Magic has listeners outside of the United States, so I wanted to broaden the conversation beyond the states. So welcome. You certainly bring a breadth of international expertise and understanding.
I'm happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you're here. What are the differences that you notice from the states and other countries, whether it's teaching or culture, or what are some of the things that perhaps brought to mind some universality or perhaps commonalities?
Well, the one thing that I recognize as I move around the world is that it's wonderful to see how diverse we are, and in the midst of the diversity to see how much the same we are. I mean, the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter what color the paint job is, what color the texture of the roof covering is on any of us, or the color of the windows of the eyes. We respond to the same things in many of the same ways. There are a few cultural differences in terms of what we laugh about, what we may cry about, but generally speaking, we are 99.9% exactly the same genetically, and we have the same impulses within us to take care of our family, to want the highest and the best for our children, to want lives that are filled with love and peace and harmony. We're all chasing that. We're all somehow trying to find it within ourselves, or many of us outside of ourselves through other people. So I see us as being more the same than we are different. And I love being in situations that help me recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Well, today's conversation is about widening the curve. Okay. There's been a whole lot of conversation about flattening the curve.
That's for sure.
Trying to keep us socially distant. But widening the curve also gives us a better view of our oneness. This COVID-19 has brought us into interesting discoveries. So I think it's also time for us to expand in our way of seeing, so that the curve can actually be widened. Now, the course you designed on Heart-Centered Living series is masterful. Would you be so kind as to describe to us how we can expand our hearts more during this time?
Oh, I would love to do that. I'd like to give a little background to it, if I may. First of all, when I came into religious science, oh, 35, 40 years ago, and I started working with Dr. O.C. Smith at City of Angels Church of Religious Science here in LA, I would often say to him, O.C., how different would this teaching be if it were the art of the heart rather than science of mind? Science of mind is the other name for religious science. And we would have big, I could say, arguments, debates. How about that?
Yes,
About what that meant. And I kept saying, the people are too much in their heads. When change, transformation comes from the heart,
yes,
when our connection with one another is really from the heart and not from the head. And so if you only have an intellectual understanding of something, you only have the tip of the iceberg, the wee bit of what is really being communicated, if you don't understand it from the heart. And I say that because I believe that the heart is the seat of the soul and it's the
yes,
gateway to the infinite. And so when our heart is at peace, when we are quiet, at peace, still, uh, in love, in joy, appreciating beauty, our heart rate variance wave is very smooth. And when our heart rate variance wave is smooth, we have access to our human intellect and we have access to infinite intelligence. And what a lot of people don't understand is that intellect and intelligence are very different.
yes,
Our human intellect is really the sum total of our experiences, our indoctrination, and our conscious thoughts. Infinite intelligence is exactly that. It's infinite. It's that realm of ideas that we can tap into. Every human being has the ability to tap into infinite intelligence. It's where Albert Einstein went to download information for his general theory of
relativity.
relativity. It's
Hmm.
where George Washington Carver tapped in and came up with 300 and some ideas for how he could use peanuts and sweet potatoes to create other kinds of products that could be used, anything from plastics to fuel to lubricants, coming from the same products that other people were just cracking the shells open and eating.
Hmm.
So when we talk about the heart, we talk about our understanding of the mastery of the heart is where we begin to master ourselves. So in 5 to 10 seconds, we can change our state of being. Heart Math Institute in Northern California has brought this down to what they call heart coherence. When we enter heart coherence, in 5 to 10 seconds, we take a few deep breaths, breathing as if breathing through the heart. And in that time, as we think about something that we appreciate, as we think about beauty, as we think about love, as we think about something that makes us smile, something that makes us laugh, our heart rate variance wave, it becomes very smooth, almost like a sine wave. And we change our state. If we have been agitated, when we're in a state of agitation, a state of aggravation, our heart rate variance wave is very jagged. And in those moments, when our heart rate variance wave is jagged, when we're upset, we actually can't think because our heart is sending out this frequency of energy that literally shuts down our neocortex, which is our thinking brain. It's
Yes,
what makes us distinctively human. And what then is in charge of us would be our reptilian brain, which is our fight, flight, or freeze aspect, or our limbic system or mammalian center in the brain that puts us in touch with our emotional history. So the heart is very much the center of us learning to get control over our emotions and It's our heart through which we, during meditation, enter into a connection, a direct awareness of our connection to the infinite.
Yes.
So
Many
that's
of the exercises that you shared with us when you brought this course to my then congregants were mind-blowing. And, there were lots of demonstrations, and there was a deep dive into our psyches, into our self-images, and into our emotional body. Can you give us an example of how we can live more heart-centered? Like, what steps can we take to live more from our hearts than from our heads?
well, in what I just said, you can make the shift from being head-centered. When you take a few deep breaths and breathe as if breathing through the heart, and think of something beautiful, something wonderful, something that brings a smile to your face, you actually change your state of being. And in that new state of being, you're open to new ideas and ideas from the infinite mind.
So thinking
Ideas,
about a person that I am loving, or thinking about something that I enjoy doing, or
it,
just changing my breathing. Is
it's
that what
just
you're?
changing where your focus is.
Yes.
Let me give you an example. There was a young man I met in a Starbucks. I'd been going to Starbucks every day for a couple of weeks to do some writing, just to get out of my home office. And every day that I went, I saw him playing a game of chess with somebody. And he was beating the pants off of everyone who sat down to play with him. And one morning I arrived and he was alone. And I walked over to him and I said, I've been watching you for a couple of weeks, and man, you are good. You are really good. I said, I don't play chess all that well because I gave it up after my son at about 10 started whipping me. I gave up chess. I said, but you beat everybody that you play. Have you ever entered a tournament? And he said, yeah, I entered a tournament, but I don't do so well in those. And I said, well, what happens? He says, I'm playing the game. And he said, I know this game. He said, but I can't think. I make all kinds of mistakes and I lose. And I said, I think I know what can help you. I think I know what happens to you. What happens to you is that you you get upset and your heart rate variance wave. There's a wave that comes from your heart that gets really jagged and it causes you not to be able to think because it shuts down your thinking brain. I said, I have some biofeedback equipment that I'd love to bring and let you see for yourself what happens when you're upset and then what happens when you're calm and how you can make that shift, how you can calm yourself down by simply thinking about something that gives you joy. I said, now, I'm just offering it. You can say no. He said, no, 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 bring it. So the next day, I hooked him up to the equipment and I showed him how it worked. And I showed him how the equipment showed the changes in his heart rate variance wave. And so I told him to think of something that really upset him. And he thought of that, and the waves were all jagged. And I said, now think of something that just brings you joy. What is the most joyful thing in your life? And he said, my baby girl. And when he said it, his voice changed, his countenance changed, and the wave started smoothing out. I said, see that? That's your body telling the truth about what you're feeling right now, what is actually going on with you. And so in that moment, he he said, okay, well, let's keep trying it. And in this particular biofeedback game that I had him playing, when you were in what the heart math people call coherence, then the this rainbow would form and it would begin to fill this pot with gold. But if your thoughts changed, if your feelings changed, then the rainbow would disappear and it would happen instantaneously. And so we did it a number of times, and I caught him as the rainbow was changing. It was disappearing. And I said, you just had a thought. What was that thought? It was a negative thought. And he said, how do you know that? I said, because your body's telling me this.
Right.
Your heart is telling me this. And he said, for real? I said, yeah, your body doesn't lie.
Right.
It's telling the truth about where you are. And I said, so what was the thought? He said, I realized I was sitting here and I had to pay attention to time because I have to meet my parole officer in 2 hours and I can't be late. And so I have to watch the time. And he said, I said, oh, okay, so you got nervous. Something scared you. Like, oh, wait, what time is it? He said, yeah. I said, okay. We went back to it. And I said, go back to your baby girl. See her smile. See her that first time she took a run across the floor by herself with that sense of freedom. And he just started glowing again, and everything changed on the screen. He was like, wow, this feels really good. We did it a number of times, and there was a point where he said, you mean for me to change my state of being, that's all I have to do is breathe through my heart and change my thought to something positive, something I really love or appreciate? I said, yes, or a beautiful place. He said, oh, man, I wish I had known that 15 years ago. He said, 15 years ago, he said, I was a good kid. My parents raised me and they sent me away to college. He said, I'm a college student. He's a kind of a nerdy college student, and folks would tease me. There was this group of guys who teased me every day for weeks. He said, and they upset me. He said, and one day I went berserk. He said, and I hit the guy and I knocked him down. He hit his head and he died.
Oh.
He said, I went to prison. He said, you mean if I had known how to change my state, I might not have done that? I said, yes, that's true. He said, if I had just known how to control my own feelings, how to shift from being upset with them to being calm within myself, I wouldn't have done that. I said, most likely that's true. And he said, oh. He said, I got to go now. He said, but can I call you? I gave him my number. And he called me back. He said, you just changed my life.
Mm.
I know now how I can shift myself, how I don't have to get upset with other people, how I can, in the moment, change. I said, yes, you do know that. You can do that. So that's an example of how understanding how your heart works, understanding how we work as human beings. And it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what religion you espouse to. None of that matters.
Right.
We all function in essentially the same way.
So we're expanding our hearts.
Yes, we're expanding into our hearts, into the capacity of our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And as we do that, we expand our awareness, we expand our consciousness, we are open to new understanding. What happens quite often is people are so entrenched in intellectual ideas that are associated with their belief system, their religion. And when you start shutting down and saying, well, I know I'm right, and you start thinking about what your beliefs are, what you've been told, then you're operating from your head and not from your heart.
Right.
But if you really listen, you'll understand that when you get rid of the cultural camouflage, the things that make the religions look different, at the core of it, they are one.
Yes.
Because they are initiated by the same quest, the same desire that is in every human being, and that is a desire to understand more about who we are, more about the things that we can change and the things that we can do to make our lives happier, more stable, more complete.
Well, I love hearing the story about the young man because it makes it very personal. And I know that you've taught a lot of subjects in a lot of different arenas and disciplines, neuroscience and metaphysics, and more. And you seem to be pretty unlimited. So I know we're going to have you back on Mystic Magic. What I want to ask you is, how are your different disciplines that you've taught related? Like if you were to use neuroscience and metaphysics for an example, how do they intersect?
Okay, that's easy. And I would like to say that I'm no more unlimited than anyone else on the planet.
Right.
It's the same capacity that is present for everyone. But to talk about neuroscience and metaphysics, in neuroscience over the past 30 years, they've discovered brain waves. And actually it's more than, I'd say 40 years. And there are 4 basic waves that folks talked about for a long time. That was beta, alpha, theta, and delta. Beta being our normal waking consciousness. When we're problem solving and talking to one another. It's primarily in beta. And then alpha is, going down a little slower step where you're a little bit more open to creative ideas. Um, uh, and then you go to theta, which is sort of twilight. So that place between being awake and being asleep, and when you're even more open to fancy, to
Mm-hmm.
dreaming. And then there's delta, which is deep sleep. Well, the interesting thing is, over the past 40 years, they've discovered that from birth to 10, some people say birth to 6, we are primarily in delta, which is very much like being under hypnosis. We're down towards delta in our brain waves when we're hypnotized. That means we come into the world fully open to be hypnotized into believing whatever the people around us believe. We're
Mm-hmm.
hypnotized and programmed to have those beliefs. But what they found with, say, Tibetan monks, a Tibetan monk who can go out in minus 20-degree weather up in the Himalaya mountains, uh, naked and wrapped in a wet blanket, sitting outside in the snow. And he or she melts the snow, and you can see the steam rise off of them as they dry the blanket, melt the snow, and they are not affected by minus 20-degree weather. Well, that is a state of consciousness that is achieved through spiritual practices
Yes.
of meditation and prayer that the monk or the nun has actually gone through. So neuroscience allows us to understand what happens to the human under certain practices that in the past have been associated with spirituality, with religions. In deep prayer for a, uh, a Christian mystic, the same changes in brain states would be shown. So we realize that it's not about religion. It's not about um, spirituality. It's about who we are as human beings and what it is that puts us in a state of calm, a state of peace, a state of mindfulness, as the Tibetan monks would talk about, so that we are open and receptive to abilities and powers within ourselves. So
Yes.
that's metaphysical and it is neuroscience.
Wonderful. Tapping into our genius and really being able to expand what our possibilities are, sounds like.
Let's expand into them, yes.
So I was looking at your background and I noticed that your parents were pretty mystical. What do you think the greatest takeaways are that you receive from them? I don't know if it's music or liturgy or metaphysics or meditative practices.
Well,
In order
how
for
many
you.
how many minutes do we have? Uh, let me say this. I am a child of the civil rights movement. My parents were civil rights activists. And in the process of being a very little child, like being 5 years old and being in nonviolent direct action classes in preparation for integrating an elementary school, we were taught the power of prayer, the power of discovering within ourselves a power within us that is greater than anything that's in appearance in the world, is essentially what what we were learning in the many prayer meetings that they had in order to generate a level of spiritual protection for the 7 children who were going in one school and the other two who were going into a rural school. Uh, we had to have a sense of knowing that we were protected. And so I remember, this is from my mother. I remember she was the one who walked us to school. We couldn't get within the last block of the school. And we were in our minister's car. He was taking his grandson and his daughter to the same school. We had to get out and walk that last way. As we were walking that last block and a half to the streets were lined with white people who were carrying baseball bats and broken bottles and sticks and calling us everything but children of God. And we had to walk down the street in the middle of the street while they were shouting. When we got to the steps of the school, we were going up, and my mother had my sister and me by the hand. And there was a man holding a jar. And he looked at my mother and he said, um, I don't know if I'd leave my pickaninnies here if I were you. You don't know what they're going to look like when you come back. He was holding a jar of acid.
Oh.
And I remember my mother stood up to her 5 feet 2 inches tall self and looked him in the eye and said, excuse me, with such force of spirit that you actually saw him recoil. He backed up and he let us go past. He didn't know what hit him. Well, in the civil rights movement, one of the disciplines that was taught, primarily by Bayard Rustin,
Mm-hmm.
right, who taught Satyagraha, which is the spiritual principle that Gandhi coined and taught during the Indian liberation movement. And it is the soul force.
Yes.
It is getting in touch with truth force or soul force. It is an energy. It is a capacity of the heart to stand knowing that you're standing in truth, stand knowing that you're standing in love. You're not in battle with people, but you're standing knowing that you have the right for whatever it is that you're seeking in that moment. And so she hit him with this woof, and he stepped back and we walked in. Well, I saw her on other occasions, just to give you an example, when she was in her late 70s at the time. And I went to Philadelphia to visit my parents, and my mother and I got on the public bus to go downtown. And she stepped on the bus before I did, put her money in. And as I stepped off on the bus, I realized, uh-oh, something's going on here, because she had stopped. And I heard her say, you will stop. And I said, uh-oh, what is mother getting us into now? There were 9 young men on the bus who had knives, and one or two of them had guns. And they were tormenting an old Jewish man, and they were terrorizing the whole bus. And my mother said, you young men will stop. And you will stop now. Sit down. And I said, okay, here we go. And I took a deep breath, and she said, and they sat down. And she said, and put those things away, pointing to the knives and the gun. And she said, you will not torment the people on this bus. I know that each one of you has a grandmother, an aunt, a grandfather, an uncle, somebody who taught you better than this. Stop it. Don't do this again. And they're all sitting there like, the bus took off, and at the next corner, when it stopped, those guys got off the bus. When they got off the bus driver turned around and looked at my mother and said, lady, I don't know who you are, but you've got more moxie than anybody that I've ever seen. And everybody on the bus stood up and clapped.
Mm-hmm.
She was using soul force.
Yes.
Now, my father, equally equipped, the day that we started school, he was really we don't know exactly where he was, but he was somewhere in vigil, holding vigil in prayer. He understood that he needed to hold the space for all of the children who were going into this, not just us. He didn't need to go someplace where his emotion, his anger might be triggered.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew he needed to stay back, and he had certain psalms and other things that he read every morning. He was up every morning at least by 4 o'clock, and he was meditating from 4 in the morning until 7:30 or 8 as we were getting up to go to school. So if you got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you passed his study, you could peep in and see him. He had a candle lit, he had his Bible open, and he was wherever he was in trance.
Right.
And that was his spiritual discipline. He had a classmate when he was in college who was from Sierra Leone. And this young man was the son of the high priest of the Mindi people. And so he was in training to become the high priest. And my father said sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night and he would see these glowing orbs hanging in the air with faces in it. And each face, each person in each bubble is like television, only wireless and without the instruments, the technology that we know. and they would be speaking to the young man in Mendi, and he would be asking questions. The young man would be asking questions or having dialogue. It was in Mendi. My father didn't know what it meant, but it was a window into the mystical tradition of West Africa, the mystical tradition that the shaman, some might call, or the high priest, were engaged in. So, and my father's grandfather was from Haiti and had been steeped in Haitian Vodun. And his grandmother was a Native American woman from the Lenape ethnic group who had spiritual practices that were outside of what our Christian background, Judeo-Christian tradition would be. So there was a very fertile ground for the development of spiritual understanding, mysticism, metaphysical awareness, whatever you want to call it, in our home. Some of it was for protection. My parents loved taking us into places where people didn't want us. And even in the late 70s, we were in Little Rock, Arkansas, and came up against the Klan. And that was an experience, but what got us through it was my father said, this is the most important spiritual work we will probably ever do. Mm-hmm. But here's what you need to do. And so he gave my mother and me an idea of a practice that we needed to be engaged in. And it saved our lives. They really wanted to kill us. They threatened to kidnap my mother. They threatened to do untold things to me. And they tried to blow up our house. And it was my father's faith and his divine connection, you could say, that alerted him. He knew something was wrong and he checked the gas line. And if he hadn't checked it, it would have exploded because it had been tampered with. So those are the kinds of experiences that I've been involved in. And so my spiritual practices are very much influenced by that.
Wonderful. Now, what kind of events or websites or programs would you like to promote? I know that these people who are listening and watching want to know more about what you're doing.
Well, our website is kepra-institute.org, and that's KHEPRA-institute.org. And you can find out more information about the organization that I work with on a daily basis.
And the upcoming workshops that you have going on?
I don't have a workshop coming up right now, okay. But especially through this period, where we're dealing with COVID-19. I'm doing a number of things online on Zoom.
Right.
On every Saturday, and we're getting ready to start a Wednesday program and probably a Sunday evening program as well. And I have a podcast that will begin next week called Spiritual Sanity.
Okay. That
will be on Apple and iTunes and a lot of other platforms.
Wonderful.
So look for Spiritual Sanity.
Yes. So we'll make sure that all the links and everything are on the show notes of Mystic Magic. Thank you for joining us today. You are always rich with wisdom and insight, and I see where it comes from, and I'm just very grateful for you. Mystic Magic is the name of this program, and this episode is Widening the Curve. Thanks for tuning in.